us up in prayer, and then we will. I will give it over to Rachel. So, dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you and praise you for loving us, for sending Jesus to die individually for us, so that we could be with you and have a relationship with you, Father. And Lord, I just thank you that you allow us to serve you through ESL ministry, reaching the nations, especially the nations that you've sent here to our doorstep. Is fun, it's exciting, it's enjoyable, and it's fruitful. And Lord, I just thank you that Rachel has put together this literacy workshop. And we just pray for no technical difficulties tonight on anyone's end, so that we can all learn a lot from Rachel. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So just real quick, this is being hosted by Mission to North America. That's who I work for, as the ESL Ministries Director. And God sent us Rachel right before the pandemic. She's one of our ESL trainers down there in Roanoke, Virginia. And God always sends me, M&A ESL, sends us great, talented people. And Rachel is right at the top of that. And I was just, she came to us with the needed knowledge and resources right before the pandemic hit. She was crucial in helping us figure out how to do our full training on Zoom. And this is not the first time that she has offered supplemental training for people. So Rachel, take it away.
Thank you. I am glad to be here with all of you and get to share. So we will go ahead and start jumping in, because I have built into my PowerPoint to also kind of explain what the night's going to look like. Let me find, here we go. And so, so our goal tonight is to get to talk about working with adult English literacy learners. And I often use ESOL, English for Speakers of Other Languages, in part because we know that a lot of our students, it's not their second language, right? But we can use ESL, ESOL, all of that interchangeably, it's fine. But this is such an important topic, and I'm glad that you all joined. So to give you an idea of what you can expect, I like to do this partially because we know this is good for our learners too. They want to know what to expect, and especially learners who don't have a lot of educational background. They want to know where they're going because it feels safer and is helpful. So, so I've already introduced myself a little bit, giving you an overview of the night. We'll have objectives. We're going to start on the theoretical end and talk about what is literacy, and some strengths and challenges of our adult learners. We want to make sure we talk about their strengths, because it's easy to look at it as a deficit, but we want to say also there are some unique things that they bring to the table. I expect that's going to take around an hour. We'll see. Again, I've never done this in a webinar, so we'll see if the timing changes. And then we're going to go into doing some teaching methods and some practical tips in the classroom, some suggestions, things that you can do. And then I hope to have some time for Q&A. And I'm going to have a full set of notes. So I'm looking at my notes on my phone while I talk. This is going to be sent to you at the end of the presentation. So feel free to take notes if you would like, but also I am going to share those notes with you later on, as well as a few other resources, some recommended resources to look at. So that's the way it's going to go. A few other housekeeping things, just to make sure that you stay on mute for right now, because background noise can come in, or somebody might show up, or your phone might ring or something. So just go ahead and mute right now. There are going to be a few times that I will have you participate, mostly by writing in the chat. I may have a couple times where you can jump in and share something, just depending on how we're going with time. But then, as I said, at the end, we can spend some time and talk more. and share. Also, just so you know, my apartment, sometimes my Wi-Fi gets a little bit unstable. So if you see me kind of lag for a minute, I'll come back. But that's also why Nancy's here too. So if for something crazy happened, she would be here and we will figure it out. But we're praying that it will be okay and we'll keep going. So I think that was all that I was going to share for getting going. So let's get started. So our objectives tonight, when I remember in undergrad, when I was first studying elementary education, I hated writing objectives, but my professors did a good job, because when I went to write this workshop, the first thing I did was write objectives. I wanted to know, okay, what do I want you to know and be able to do? So my hope at the end of this, you will be able to explain some of the steps that are required in learning to read and write. I think you might be surprised with some of the foundational aspects that we don't necessarily think of. You will identify the strengths and the challenges of the learners that we're working with and talking about tonight. You will understand differences in pre-literate, non-literate, and semi-literate learners. And we're going to talk about what all of those are, what the differences are, and why it matters in terms of how we approach them in the classroom. You will also know some practical ways to shape their instruction and best reach these learners. I wish that I could spend hours with each of you and help you craft everything, but this is an overview. But my hope is that you can take away a few tools and some background knowledge that's going to help you shape that instruction. And hope that you will apply this information in your own context in the way that it's going to work for you. So to start, this is a time when you get to just write in the chat. We're going to start that way. What is literacy? This is a really broad question. So write some things in the chat. I'll just read some ideas that you have. What does literacy mean? Reading? Okay. Ability to comprehend what you read, writing, understanding what is read, communicate in, oh, we also have speaking there, reading and writing of a language. Yeah, and we are talking about print literacy. Read and write, express what you need to say, communicate graphically. That's a good point. We're using graphics rather than oral. Use language to communicate, listening. Make sense of symbols used in words. That's a good one. We're going to talk about symbols. Communicate ideas. All right, great. So thank you for sharing. So we have a lot of different ideas of what literacy means. And to look at literacy, it is a functional skill. Literacy is not just something that you can check a box that you can do, but it means something. Can you read and write to function in society? This is a skill with a purpose. Children learn to read for a lot of different reasons, because they have to, but also for fun, for interests with storybooks. But adults are learning to read because they need to be able to do it, to function, to do a lot of everyday tasks that are really important. So literacy allows people to gain information, express opinions, be independent, pursue further education, training, and future steps. So there's a lot here, and that's from the National Institute for Literacy. So they're going to have a pretty comprehensive idea of what literacy allows you to do. In the US, in our culture, reading allows you to move ahead in the future. For example, if someone is not literate in terms of being able to read and write and use those skills, they probably will not be able to do something like buy a house. They probably are going to need to be renting, because if you are a renter, you don't need to do things like pay the property taxes or read the manual of your new refrigerator. Now, that would help, but That's just one example of something that a door that's not going to be as open to you if you're not able to read. You are able to do things like seek out other options or other opinions, do research, find out information for yourself, and be independent. And if we think about our learners who might be coming from a society where literacy is not, being able to read and write is not as important, that wouldn't have been a limitation where they came from. If it's not so important to be able to read and write in the society where you come from, then you're not limited by not being able to do it. But the US is such a print-heavy society. Everything has writing. You have to be able to read and write for everything. And so that's a huge difficulty for our learners who come here and suddenly they're limited by not having this ability. It is really difficult to measure literacy ability for adult learners. And part of this is because a lot of times when we think about someone's reading level, you're going to think of it as a grade level, right? That person reads on a 2nd grade reading level or a 5th grade reading level. And that's okay, but honestly, that's not the best measurement to use because that person does not have the mind of a child. A child is going to come at reading with a different background because they have different life experiences than the adult. The adult has a lot more life experiences to compare. But this is just the way that we have to measure it. So I say that just to say that if you have an adult who you say, oh, this adult reads on the 2nd grade reading level, that doesn't mean that they read exactly the same way that a 2nd grader does. So it's hard to measure that because they're going to come at this differently. It's also hard to measure literacy because it's hard to retain adult students. And I think probably all of you know that if you work with adult learners, they've got a lot going on in their lives. And coming to class can't always be the first priority for all of our students. They've got a lot of other things going on to take care of family, work. They might be still trying to take care of somebody back in a different country. So they also might have a hard time coming to school because they feel ashamed of a lack of education, or because going to class feels kind of scary or feels uncomfortable. They might feel like they're dumb or they're not equipped to do it. And we know that they're not dumb, but it might feel very intimidating. I remember when I was teaching 1st grade or elementary English learners, I had a 1st grade student who she was really struggling, and we asked the mom to come in for a conference. And the mom came to school, and we found out that the mom, they were from Mexico. And the mom actually spoke an indigenous language of Mexico called Otomí. And she spoke very broken Spanish. And so our Spanish interpreter was having a hard time interpreting in the conference because he said, her Spanish isn't really that great. And after the conference was over, the teacher and I looked at each other and we just said, we are so amazed by this mom, so brave. She was so brave. She told us in the conference, I only went to school to 4th grade. My Spanish isn't very good. And we thought, how brave is she to walk into this school in a different country, try to communicate in her 2nd language with an interpreter, to do what was right for her daughter, to try to help her as best as she could. Like, we were just blown away. And it gave us more empathy for the student as well. But I'm pretty sure that mom also didn't really have literacy skills. Her 1st language, Otomí, has a writing system, but it's not used very much. So, there were all these things that were really difficult for them. And we could just see how that kind of stacked up in their way to make it more difficult. So here's another thing right in the chat. Just think for a second, it's the end of the day. What are some of the things that you have read today? I'm sure there are a lot. Newspaper, textbook, phone, Facebook, book, math problems, emails, technical manual, newsletter, text, contracts, novel, recipe, the Bible, Too many emails, Nancy. Yeah. Twitter, road science is a good one. Devotional. Right. We might think about books, but then you think like, oh yeah, I took my mom to the doctor this morning and we had to figure out where to drop her off. So we had to read all the signs at the entrances to figure out where it was. Oh, a how-to on a painting. Yeah. Your mail. So there are so many things that you're reading on a day-to-day basis. Filling out a form. Yeah, I had to fill out a tax form today. And I was like, I don't know if I understand all the words on this paper. So there are so many things here in our day-to-day life that we have to read. And that's just important to stop and think about. So we're going to think about what is required in learning to read. I hope you are amused by my cute little pictures, but I'm going to explain what they're here for. So we often think of learning to read as learning the letters and then figuring out what they mean. And that's definitely part of it, but there are foundational things that come before that. And if you've ever taught a kid to read, you may know some of these things. So first, actually, all right, let's see if my slide will change now. If you have a question, if you'll just hang on to it for right now and we'll come back to later on. So the first thing that's required in learning how to read is manipulating sounds, words, and phrases. And so that means being able to take apart sounds and move them around. For example, if I said, we have the word cat, we're going to take off the k and add b instead. And now we have bat. This is something that I actually did with kindergartners when I taught elementary school. That is a foundational skill to reading because we understand there are these sounds, they can be moved around and we can change things. If you have never thought of language in that abstract way, about sounds making up words, about words being moved around, that things can all shift, then you're not going to be able to get to the part about there are words that you can read on a paper. Knowing that those sounds move around is really this bottom part that we have to be able to do first. I was talking to a woman who actually she teaches literacy level learners for World Relief outside of Chicago. But at one time she lived in, I don't remember which country, but she lived in a country in Africa and she was learning a language that was unwritten. And she said sometimes if she was talking to someone in that language and she would ask them just to repeat part of a sentence, they couldn't do it. Like, you know, she just said, okay, what were the last 3 words you said? They couldn't do it because they were not used to thinking of words by themselves. They were used to thinking of it as chunks of language or just using language, not thinking about the abstractness of how the words fit together. So this is actually a big concept. And this is why we in our society that does so much with literacy, this is one reason we play word games with our kids. Like when you do Anna, banana, bobana, banana, fana, fofana, fee, fi, fofana, Anna. Have you ever done that with your kids? You're teaching them that you can change and move around the sounds. That's why we play rhyming games with kids and we say, okay, what rhymes with cat? Fat rhymes with cat, fat rhymes with cat, mat rhymes with cat. They're learning those rhyming things and that they can change the sounds and move them around. So this is a really important part of learning how to read. If you are from a culture that doesn't have a writing system, you might not have ever thought about rhyming. Now you might have, your culture might have a way that you also do rhyming, but it might work differently as well. So when we have that idea, sound, word, phrase manipulation, we also need, as I said, to be aware that words and sounds can be separated, can be moved around. Then we need to have this understanding of how print works. So print would be the letters that we see on a page. Being able to understand what they do. So that's what these pictures are here for. There was a study that was done in Morocco, actually, with some adults who were not literate in Arabic. But Like, it doesn't really matter what language. I mean, this is just about literacy in general. So these were adults that were not literate in Arabic. And they showed one woman in the study the three words, the three goats. So I have them here in English, but it's the same. The three words, the three goats. And because she didn't know how written language worked, she thought the word the represented a goat, the word three represented a goat, and the word goats represented a goat. And so that's how come it was the three goats. She didn't understand that the letters carried the sounds to say the three goats. So I don't know, when I read this study, it kind of blew me away because I thought, what? Of course the letters make the sounds. But if you think about a writing system like Mandarin Chinese, you would have symbols that would mean each thing. So this is something else that our learners have to start understanding, and we have to help them to grow in their understanding that these symbols are, and the combination of symbols are making those sounds. And so when we read, we're reading words that translate to the sounds that we say out loud. So that's another big concept that's really foundational. And one other thing is that they need to know that the print conveys meaning, and it could convey any meaning. Another thing in that study, some of the learners thought that you could only write down things that were true. They obviously hadn't heard of the internet. So they would have thought when pigs fly was not possible to write down because pigs flying is not true. So we want our learners to understand that print can convey any meaning. You can write down anything you want to. It's just about using this system to use the letters, put them together, make the sounds that we want, to make the words that we say, and someone else can read them. So these are a lot of different concepts and they are very foundational. You have grown up with them probably if you grew up going to school and you grew up in the United States. We would expect little kids maybe to not have these concepts, but we would expect even adults in the US who don't read very well to understand most of these concepts. So we have to just remember that these are all things that you learned. And so not knowing these things does not mean that someone lacks intelligence. It just means that they have not encountered these things. So I think most of you know that or all of you know that if you're working with adult learners, that they are, you know that they are intelligent and they're just approaching things differently. But remembering that these are just foundational skills they haven't come across yet is a big deal. So we're going to move into some strengths and challenges of these adult learners now. And so first we need to talk about who these learners are. And I mentioned some different categories before. You might have any or all of these learners in a class. You might even have all of them in the same class, although I hope you can split them up. But especially if you work in a church-based program, we end up with all kinds of students and we love on them the best we can. So the first category that I would have are pre-literate learners. And according to when people segment all of these things out, pre-literate learners actually come from a culture where there is no written language, or it was just recently developed. So I mentioned the story I told about the mom of the student I had who spoke Otami. She would be a pre-literate learner because her culture just recently developed a writing system. Some of our learners who come from parts of Africa also are under this. And a lot of times missionaries are the ones who are going and making the writing systems for these languages so that they can translate the Bible. When I was in Bulgaria, there were some communities of Roma people who are also called Gypsy people sometimes. And some of those communities also don't have a writing system for their language, although they're starting to develop them now. some of those communities have them. So they're pretty new. However, for example, for the ones in Bulgaria, there is a national written language around them. So the Gypsy people who spoke the Roma language, there was no writing system in the Roma language, but they had some exposure to Bulgarian and the Bulgarian language. They go to school and be around that. You might have learners who are from Mexico and speak an indigenous language, but they have been exposed to Spanish, or some from different parts of Africa, they've been exposed to Swahili or French. So those learners may actually have some more ideas of some of these concepts because there is some writing going on around them. They've seen it, encountered it, but they cannot read and write. So they most likely entirely lack those skills that I was just talking about before, about knowing how to segment the sounds, knowing how to put things together, knowing how the print carries the meaning. And that's just because their society is built on oral language rather than in English, the English-speaking society. Our society is really built on written languages. So their culture is actually just formed a lot differently than ours are. So our next group of learners are non-literate learners, and their language has a written component, but they were never able to learn it. For example, sometimes if you're working with women who come from the Middle East, they may maybe a woman who just didn't get to go to school for whatever reason. Maybe her husband learned how to read, or her brothers, her father. So reading was around her. She might have some of the concepts in general of how it works. But she actually never learned how to read because she didn't get to. This might also be for learners who didn't get to go to school because of other issues, like because of war, because of disability, something like that. We are focusing mostly on pre-literate and non-literate learners for this, but you may also have learners who are semi-literate, which means they learn to read and write to a degree, but not very well. And that's often learners who went to school somewhat, but their education was interrupted by poverty, by war, illness, some kind of cultural expectations, marriage maybe. They have foundational skills of literacy, but they can't read or write very much. And then we have some other learners who are literate, but they're not literate to learn how to read and write in English. So you might have a learner who's not literate in an alphabet, so someone who can read and write in Chinese, and so they know the symbols that make up like Mandarin Chinese, but they don't have the specific concept of alphabet that we use here. Or you might have someone that is non-Roman alphabet literate, which means they can read and write in another language with a different alphabet, like the Cyrillic alphabet, that's what Bulgarian uses, Arabic, Thai. So those the ones who are non-alphabet literate or non-Roman alphabet literate are going to have those foundational literacy skills already. So those aren't going to be as much of our concern today, but just kind of wanted to touch on that as well, because you might have beginners who come from those backgrounds, but they're going to move up a lot more quickly because they can jump over some of those foundational skills. So looking at some of the strengths that these learners bring, they do bring some unique strengths to the classroom. One, just as adult learners, they are cognitively mature, which means, their brains are more developed, as opposed to teaching children how to read, where their brains are still developing. They're still learning how to grasp abstract concepts. The adults have already moved through their brain development. So that's something we don't want to take for granted. They also have some problem-solving abilities. I think any student that you work with here has to be a great problem solver just to live their life here. And especially if you're not literate, you have to find some ways around things to do what you need to do. We know that a lot of our adult students are very enthusiastic. They're very grateful. I've got a learner who comes to our English program, and she's in our intro class, and I got to learn some of her story through her daughter who interpreted, and just this mom works hard. She works hard in a hard job all day, and then she'll still come to English class and she is tired, but she is enthusiastic and she is learning and she is grateful. And I have just been so encouraged by having her there. So that's something we want to remember is a great strength of our learners. And then something specifically for our literacy learners is that they are good at learning through hearing, speaking, and watching. If you have not relied on writing to help you learn and remember things, you have to get really good at memorizing them. I am so dependent on writing things down. I'm constantly, I carry around a big planner. I'm always writing things down. I'm probably the weirdest millennial because I don't put everything in my phone. But I do have my phone and I'm always Googling things or writing things down, emailing myself something. To try to remember it, writing shopping lists and things, because I'm not going to remember. But our learners are really good at hearing something, listening to it, memorizing it, practicing it, saying it back, watching you do something, learning how to do it. So this is a strength we want to remember and capitalize on when we can in our classrooms, because it's a great thing. And they can teach us some things about that. So let's see, we're doing pretty well with time. So if you have any other strengths that you would like to add to this list, go ahead and come off mute and just shout something out. What other strengths can you think of that you've seen in your learners?
Helpful attitude, they'll help others in the class.
Yeah.
Persistence.
Good memory.
Yeah.
Life experiences.
To me, it's just making a connection between what they actually hear and then like what it means to within the language.
Yeah, so making connections between what they're hearing and what it is and learning.
Yeah, like I remember I had a student one time. He was we were talking about like different slang, and so we were talking about how we might say eat before you pass out. In his language, like what they would normally say is eat before your knees get low. And so like he was able to kind of like connect it.
That's great.
Yeah. So
I love it.
It is.
Eat before your knees get low. I'm gonna remember that one. I like that one. What
That's
language
so
was
weird,
that?
right?
Do you know what language it was?
Oh yeah, it was Spanish. But I think he was from Guatemala. I remember when I was even learning in a German class, like for us we say kill two birds with one stone. They say kill two flies with one hand. So
yeah. That's great. Yeah, I love it.
Students are cooperative.
It's very helpful when they have a sense of humor, like mixing up those sounds and getting kitchen mixed up with the word chicken. But if they're able to laugh at that mix up, then they learn it and probably learn it better for the next time.
Yeah. Those are great.
Very highly motivated.
Yes.
I think they're very honest about their abilities, and a lot of times they're very forthcoming about weaknesses. They're not afraid to share that. They're, very humble.
So thinking about all of those strengths for our learners in general, but specifically, especially for our learners who don't have any literacy background, how can we leverage these strengths in the classroom? We've already mentioned a little bit. I mean, obviously, if they're very cooperative, we know they're going to work together with us and others in the classroom. But thinking about some of these others, how do we use this to their advantage and to our advantage as a classroom? What do you think?
I know that one way, and again, I probably had the benefit that among our group in church, we have an actual ESOL teacher that was volunteering for a while. But we would use games repeatedly, like bingo, stuff like that. So they would have to say the words, but then also it kind of boosted the enthusiasm too, because like it's a game, you get to win some candy. And then too, like we did have it a few times where like even some of the other classmates would actually help each other. Like if they had trouble pronouncing a word, or if they were trying to maybe see if they had like a match or something.
Yeah, great.
I think maybe helping them to identify some of their strengths. Yes. And letting them use that as a form of leadership. Or I mean, it's great to come in having a strength, even if you don't speak the language. So if encouraging people or bringing people to class or whatever it is, if you can identify that, they can use that. And then even if they're just using a few words in English with that, that would give them a sense of comfort and, you know, encouragement.
Yeah, definitely.
Too, maybe showing the class how to do something. If they can't say it in words, they could demonstrate something, you know, food or some kind of craft that they could use part of what they've learned, and other people could help them explain it in English.
Yeah, definitely. Anytime that we can help our learners grow in confidence, that's a huge thing. And yeah, as you said, it doesn't have to be confidence in speaking English, but it can be confidence in other things that are going along with it. And that's great.
Some of them sing beautifully. And I think that when we've had languages that, I've had to learn that are, there are different levels for saying something. It helps them with pronunciation. They get the rhythm better.
Yes. Yeah, music is a great thing, and singing, and because especially these literacy learners, they're oral learners. They've learned so many things by ear. They might have learned a lot of songs by ear and rhythms as well. And so getting to use that in the classroom is going to be a huge help for them in learning and memorizing things and getting the sound system. All right, great, thanks. Okay, you can go back on mute. We're going to move on. So I just stole this chart from an article because I liked it. So again, I'm going to send you notes at the end, and you are going to have this as well. But just comparing some factors about literate learners, so our learners who already have literacy skills and the ones who don't. So looking at literate learners, and this would be probably most of us, the way that we learn. We often learn from print, are pretty visually oriented. So we're used to looking at things and from a diagram, from written words, pictures. We make lists to remember. I have countless lists of everything. We spend years learning how to read. I think I started learning how to read when I was about 3. And we learn how to read through school, but I mean, even now, I still will read a new word somewhere and go, oh, what does that mean? But another thing with literate learners is that they know they can learn. Now, yes, there are going to be times where someone has low self-esteem and doesn't think they can. But often these learners know, yeah, I can learn. I can read something. I can figure it out. They have some confidence there. They learn best when content is relevant to their lives. So if they can apply it, if they know how it's going to help them. And then often they can distinguish between the more and less important points. So figuring out what the main ideas are, how to prioritize information. So these are all factors that literate learners have often learned in school or have learned through their experience of reading and writing. So to compare or contrast that with our non-literate learners, they have learned by doing and watching. That's how they've learned all of their lives. They tend to be orally with an A oriented, so oriented by hearing. They will repeat things to remember because they're not going to write a list down. So they're going to repeat it over and over out loud or in their minds to remember. They only have a limited time to learn how to read, you know, because they're starting late. And if you're an adult and you moved to the US, you needed to be able to read yesterday. So, you know, it feels like more of a crunch. They often will lack confidence in their ability to learn, maybe because they just haven't had a lot of school experience. Maybe because they just feel like they can't. Maybe they've been told that they can't learn, or because it just feels overwhelming. They also, just like literate learners, learn best when content is relevant to their lives. I don't think there's anybody in the world who doesn't learn best when content isn't relevant to them in some way. We have to make connections to what we know already. And then one other piece with non-literate learners, they may accept all content, all information as being of equal value. So they may read things and assume that whatever they read is true, as I mentioned earlier, that belief. So it takes a while to develop that critical thinking and that ability to understand that you might read something that's actually not true, that's actually not good information. So that's a piece that if you are working with someone for a long time who's learning literacy, you are going to have to start sorting through that as well and talking about, well, yeah, you read this, but that doesn't necessarily make it true or make it something trustworthy. So looking at this, I think it's another piece of how we can think about how to adapt instruction for our learners who are pre-literate or non-literate. And one big piece is just thinking about those repeating to remember, being orally oriented, doing and watching. This is often not how we remember learning, and it's not how we are used to structuring a class. But the more things that you can put into your class that are not based on writing things down at first, but basing things on repeating things out loud and maybe just going back and forth, repeating things, watching each other, acting things out. Charades is always a good one, or we talk about total physical response in our training. These are things that are going to really cement with these learners because that's how they've always been learning. So, and that's going to help them grow in confidence because this is a way that they're used to learning rather than writing things down. So they're going to grow in that. So for example, the program that we direct, I direct an English program at a church. I ended up subbing last week for a teacher that was out. And I had a learner who I think is probably semi-literate in her in Swahili. And she's working really hard. She works all day and is exhausted and comes to English class. And I'm just amazed. They came about a year ago from a refugee camp in Tanzania. She and her husband and a bunch of kids. Anyway, so we were just working on greetings about what is your name? My name is, where are you from? I am from. And so I had an assistant, I got him to go to the nursery and just grab a little ball. And we just tossed it, there were 4 of us in the room, we just tossed it around the room. And I would say, what is your name? And toss it to her. And she would say, my name is, and then and say her name. She would toss it to someone else. What is your name? And they would catch it. My name is. And we did this for so long. But that was what we needed, to just repeat it over and over and over, because she could write it down, but it was slow and painstaking, and she wasn't going to remember it that way. But just hearing it over and over and repeating it over and over and having just a little action of the ball just to make it some kind of interesting and different. That was what she really needed to do. And I heard her pronunciation of those sentences get better as we went on. And she got better at doing it. And she could read when I prompted her to read it, but she really just needed to get it orally because that's how a lot of her learning had been in her life. So we're going to talk some more about these specific challenges that our learners face. And you're probably familiar with a lot of these because you've worked with these learners. First of all, they are going to need some oral language before they start literacy. If you have a learner who comes to you and just got here, does not speak any English, and also you find out they don't read and write in any language, you do not want to start with teaching them the ABCs. You want to start with teaching them the things I was just talking about. What is your name? My name is. Where are you from? I am from here. Just memorizing that oral language. Hello, how are you? Fine, thank you. And you? Partially because that's the first thing that they actually need. and also because they need to have something to build on. And we want to grow them in confidence that they've learned some English and they can learn this and grow. But when I I interviewed a few people for this research, and I interviewed a teacher from my city, and she teaches for our public adult program through the school district. And she works with these learners, and she said, as soon as you write a word on the board, all of their attention is sucked onto that word, and they're not going to listen to you anymore, because that's where they're trying to focus now. They're trying to decode those symbols and figure out what's going on. And so she said, as much as you can do with oral language first, the better. As many things as you can do with oral language. That doesn't mean that we don't teach the writing, but that might mean that if you have an hour-long lesson, you spend at least 30, 40 minutes on oral language activities before you do anything in writing, because they really need to get some of that oral language down. Another piece, the fancy word for this is phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness means what I talked about earlier. Can you manipulate the sounds in the word? Can you manipulate the words in the sentence? My professor I had to take 2 semesters of teaching reading in undergrad. And the professor for that class always talked about phonemic awareness is what you can do in the dark. Can you turn the lights off in your classroom and do these activities? So can you turn the lights off and rhyme things with the word rug? Yeah, you can. You don't need to see anything. You're just doing it by listening. Can you turn the lights off and take the first sound off of cat and put "b" on it and make bat? Yeah, you can. You can do it in the dark. So those are hard. That's really hard because, again, it's very abstract, but it's a foundational skill that our learners need. So breaking down the language into phrases, words, parts of words, and sounds are all important factors. And I think our learners do start to get some of this when we teach them, my name is Rachel, my name is Laura, my name is Jill. So when they start to, okay, I can put something else in this blank. That's a beginning. We're breaking down the language, but this takes time. This takes a lot of time. So it's not something that's going to happen right away. And they don't have to master all of this before you start writing. But this is just one challenge that we have to go into knowing this is going to be tricky. We also have phonics. You might remember Hooked on Phonics from the 90s. But phonics is about the letter and sound relationships. So when we look at literacy, there's like 5 pillars of literacy instruction, 5 different parts. And one of them is phonics, about can you know that each symbol makes a sound. Now, English phonics can be tricky because you also might have a few symbols together that make a sound, like CH says ch. I speak Bulgarian. In Bulgarian, ch is one letter. It's great. It's really nice. They have a letter for sh. They have a letter for shta, SHT. That's one letter. It's great. In English, we have all these combinations that we got to teach. And then we have all these rules. If you put an E on the end of your 4-letter word, then it's going to be different. And yeah. So, but this concept that the letters have connections with the sounds is a big concept that needs to be understood. And our learners have to be able to understand that these symbols carry meaning. Somebody mentioned that with the definition of literacy. And that's with letters, but that could also be with pictures and drawings. Again, one of the teachers that I interviewed who's done this for a long time said, if she wants to use objects in her classroom with the students who are from a society with no literacy, so she has to start with a real thing. Like if she wants to do an apple, if she shows them a clip art picture of an apple, they will not know what it is. She has to start with a real apple. Then maybe she can graduate to a plastic or a wooden apple. Then maybe she can also have a photograph of an apple. Then maybe she can have a line drawing of an apple or a clip art of an apple, because they need to understand that this is all the same thing. Because if you're from a place where you don't have writing, you probably also don't have clip art illustrations of things. So remembering that those are symbols too. And those drawings carry meaning that we're used to and our learners may not be. So again, you're going to have to figure out where are your learners. They might be totally fine with your clip art pictures, but they might not be, because it might be really foreign to them, just like the letters are something new to them. In phonics, there's also this concept of print. So what does the print word mean? What do the letter shapes mean? What direction does the print go in? You might have learners who come from a background where the print goes the other direction. And just the fact that the print is what carries the meaning, and how does that work? So there's a whole lot to this, right? We also, it's a challenge for our students to read, when they start reading, to read something that's relevant to them, and it's a concept that they're familiar with. I have a link in something I'm going to share with you from a community college, and they have these great little printable books. And there's there's one about a woman who goes to the store, and it just says like, she buys rice, and there's a picture of rice. She buys cabbage, and there's a picture of cabbage. And it's great because this is really relevant to our learners. And they know what rice is, and they know what cabbage is, and they go to the store and buy these things too. But if you had a book where somebody has to walk, somebody turns and walks north, there are some cultures that north, south, east, west doesn't exist. Like that's just an abstract concept. So suddenly they have to learn the concept, but they're also learning the words, and it's just really hard. So it's hard to find texts that are relevant and connect, and we have to work at that and see what we can find, or sometimes we have to make our own things for them to practice reading. And then also writing. I mean, writing is a huge challenge because not only are we taking the understanding of how the words are written, what the shapes are of the letters, but then we have those motor skills. I was visiting before COVID, the refugee resettlement office here in Roanoke, where I live, and just went to visit pretty early on in doing my job just to kind of learn. And there was a Congolese refugee family that had come, and the mom had never learned how to read and write in any language. She was probably in her 40s. And they gave her a pencil and tried to get her to just trace her name, I think is what they had her do. Like you can print online just word tracing sheets. And I sat next to her and just helped her just trace her name. And it was so painstaking. And I thought she must feel awful, but she had never done that before. So she had to figure out, how do I hold the pencil? How do I do all of this? And understand the concept that this is her name. So that's a huge deal. I mean, there's so much that goes into that as well. And then finally, just thinking about, it's a challenge to adjust to the classroom environment. If you have learners who haven't been in school, so they're having to learn things like taking notes, organizing materials, homework. If you give homework, sitting for a while, it can be hard to sit for a while. And I hope that you try to build in times your learners can stand up and move around. And then self-monitoring, which means thinking about, how is it going? Thinking about like, do I understand this? Do I need some help? What's happening with me right now? Doing a lot of talking here. All right, so I have some very clear and easy symbols to understand here, I think. Not sure exactly what's going on in these pictures, but it was fun finding these. But just to kind of give you an idea of the fact that there are how your learners might feel when they are faced with some symbols that are totally abstract, right? We're used to our road signs. When I moved to Europe, I had to learn some new road signs that I hadn't seen before. We can guess well, at least the yellow signs, we can guess what they mean. I'm not really sure. The one on the right looks like somebody broke their wheelbarrow, maybe. I don't know. A rickshaw or something. So just to kind of give you that reminder of all symbols are abstract and we learn what they mean in a certain context. So you need to give your learners some time to understand. Also imagine if writing looked like this for you. You want to write or just shout it out. Anybody know what language this is?
Is it
Thai, right?
Thai?
It's Thai. Yeah, it's Thai. Great. So you can look at this picture and you can probably make some assumption. At least you could probably assume that it's going horizontally, right? So Thai is actually read left to right. I looked it up, but they don't have spaces between the words. So that's why it all kind of seems to run together. We look at this and we're familiar with the concept of writing in general, but we still go, I don't know, there may be someone here who knows Thai, but for most of us who don't know Thai, it looks like a lot of squiggles. I have a friend who lives in Thailand and she talks about learning Thai and it's fascinating. But we could look at this and say, well, the symbols probably stand for sounds, but we don't really know how this works because we don't see really breaks between the words in most places. We could look at the line spacing and guess that it goes horizontally and not vertically because there's more space between the lines horizontally. So because we have some writing background, we can glean a few things from this, but we still look at it and go, huh, what? And then even if you learned to read the symbols, you would have to know the words associated with them to know what it meant. When I moved to Bulgaria, I learned how to read Cyrillic pretty quickly, the Cyrillic alphabet, which was great. So if I got lost somewhere, because the first time I went to Bulgaria was in 2012, I didn't have a smartphone. I couldn't use Google Maps. If I got lost somewhere, I could call someone and say, the street sign says this, what do I do? Because I could sound it out. But I didn't know what it said. Like I could sit and sound out a book, but I didn't know what I was saying. I just could say the letter sounds. So I just show you these things to think about the fact that once you are literate, it's hard to think about what it would be like to not be literate. But I think it's an important thing to try so that we can think about what it feels like for our students who are kind of coming into this new world of literacy, to know where they're coming from. So to think about a few implications. So we've talked a lot about some of the theoretical and the foundational aspects of this. Some implications, if you can, it's a great idea to have your pre-literate and non-literate learners working in a class separately from beginning learners who have those literacy skills already. So if you've got, for example, a class with Congolese refugees who don't read and write in any language, and then you've got Spanish speakers who grew up and went to school in Mexico and can read in Spanish. It's great if you can put them in separate groups. I know that's not always possible, and we do the best that we can. But just thinking about those foundational skills, those two groups need very different things. So when we can, it's great to find ways to work with them separately. And if we can't, we want to find ways to differentiate in the classroom. So finding different ways to help them. Maybe that you use some of those adaptations like we talked about, with just having them repeat things back a lot more. It's not going to hurt any of your learners if they're listening and repeating things more. Maybe you put your learners to work in groups, and you've got some who can write and some who don't, and you have them do different things in the groups. And then just remembering that no foundational skill is too simple. As I talked about with the meanings of photos and drawings, I've got here a sketch of a banana, but if you are not familiar with bananas anyway, or even if you are familiar with bananas, but you are not familiar with black and white line drawings of a yellow fruit, that might be a little bit of an abstract concept to you. So just remembering that we don't want to assume or take for granted that our learners are in any specific place. We want to make sure that we clear the way for them and help them out. So if we can go from the real object to a photograph, to a drawing, to a symbol if necessary, that's a great way to move. And that's not even talking necessarily about the written words, that's just talking about helping them understand concepts and ideas. All right, so we're going to move into, we're doing great because it's 8:05. Move into some teaching practices, so things that you can do in your classroom. And so just some guiding principles for you to think about as the teacher. You as the teacher are a facilitator of learning, and you are an encourager. So that's just a great point to kind of keep in mind, that especially because some of your learners may not have very high self-esteem when it comes to learning how to read and write, that it is your job to be there and encourage and to help them and to make it possible. And so when you have this background to know what skills that they need to work on, you can help facilitate that learning and make it possible for them. And we want to focus on mastering skills rather than keeping schedules. I think that's one of the beautiful things about if you work in a church-based program, because nobody's saying you have to get to this chapter by this date. If you need to spend 6 weeks on chapter 1, then you can do that, and that's fine. So we want to work on helping them master the skills that they need to move ahead. We want to teach skills in meaningful contexts with real world applications. And so that means, I talked about earlier, it has to be relevant. If you are looking in a textbook and it has a chapter about something that is completely irrelevant to all of your learners, then don't teach it. We want to use things that are meaningful to them. So this requires knowing your students. You have to know them, know what they need, what they're interested in. If you're not able to communicate with them in the beginning, you can always think about things that all of our learners are going to need, because they're pretty basic. Like, they need to go to the grocery store, they need to help their kids with school or go to school, they need to talk to their landlords to get something fixed, they need to talk to their boss at work. So maybe even before talking to, they need to be able to ride the bus. So they need to know what the bus sign looks like to get on the bus here and get off the bus there. So we have a quote from a theorist that said, literacy activities become meaningful to the extent that they are needed in interactions with others and the content. So an activity that you do is going to be meaningful when it's obvious that it's connected to something in their life. If it's not connected to anything, it's not going to seem useful, and it's going to be harder to use that, to absorb that learning and to use it later on. And one other principle is just group work. Americans, if you are American, you may come at education with a bit more of an individualistic view, just because Americans tend to be more individualistic. A lot of our students come from backgrounds that are more collectivistic, meaning that they're used to working together. And so if we can find ways to help them to work together, that's an encouragement to them. They enjoy it. And everybody can learn from each other. It's not going to hurt them to practice speaking English together. It's only going to help. I was just talking to somebody today. There are a whole bunch of studies that have been done about is it okay for two learners of a language to practice speaking with each other? Are they going to mess each other up? And the answer is no, they are not going to mess each other up. Yes, it is good for them to talk to each other. They keep doing studies on this because people keep going, but really, are you sure? Yes, really, it is good for them to practice together. So I'm going to talk about, this is the language experience approach. So this is something, if you wanted to, you could structure an entire class, an entire program based on this. But you also could just choose to do this in a class sometimes, occasionally. So I just really like this, and I think the principles are great. So we're going to talk about what this could look like. And this is an approach that can be done with pre-literate learners, non-literate, just your beginning learners. So the basic premise of this is that we use real-world experiences that our students share to generate language and then write it down and use it for language practice. So this is something that would have to go alongside doing something like doing phonics, where they're learning that the letters make the sounds. And that is going to happen as well. But this is more of looking at language, written language as a whole. So in this approach, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have an experience with your class. This is so that everyone has a shared experience that you can build on. Sometimes if you can, I know it's harder now with COVID, but you can go on a field trip. So everybody's experiencing something together. You could do a science experiment, you could cook something, you could make something. And so you're going to have a teacher or an assistant taking pictures of the learners while they're doing this thing together, whatever it is. So, for example, I heard of a class that went, I actually saw a video of a class doing this. They went to a hardware store together. And so they took pictures of the students in the different aisles and the things that they found in the hardware store. And so while they're there, the teacher and the assistants are talking about what's going on. But maybe also you just cook something together as a class and everybody's making it and you're talking about what's going on. It's a fun activity, you take pictures. If you really can't do any of those experience things, you could also talk to them about experiences they've all had. Now, if you all live, for example, where I live in Roanoke, we had a whole lot of snow about a week ago. So we could do something talking about the snow because all the students experienced the snow. But it's really nicer if everybody can experience something together in that class because it's more concrete. It's not as abstract. Okay, so that's the first step. Everybody's got to do something together. The next thing that happens is we use those pictures. So hopefully you can take pictures. And now with smartphones, it's so easy because you can take a picture and then you can pull it up on the computer on a projector, look at it together. So everyone looks at the pictures and they say what's happening. So we're going to use oral language first to say what's happening. So if we're in the hardware store, we might have something like, Joe found a shovel. And so everybody, the students say what's happening. And now if none of your students are able to do that, then you're going to help them do that. And the teacher writes the students' ideas down and makes them into sentences. So this is all going to be writing down. I just glanced at that question. So this is going to happen in English as much as possible. But I would never say to, if your students are talking in their native language, I wouldn't yell at them or something. They're adults. But we're going to encourage English to be happening, and the teacher and the assistants are going to be using English consistently. So even if your learners don't have any English to talk about this, they're going to be hearing the English that's going on as they're doing whatever the experience is. So they're looking at the pictures, they're making some sentences, the teacher writes the things down. And then because the students hopefully have generated this language, these are their words. And so then they can go back and read the story together. And so this is something that you're going to read with them over and over and over. because these are words that came from the students, so they're more at their level. If you have a lot of time with them, now this is something that is really time consuming. So if you had a lot of time with them, you might have the students to copy it down. If you don't, you could make photocopies of it, and that's fine. So everyone's reading together. We might do things like have the teacher read and the students listen. The teacher and the students read together. The teacher reads and the students repeat each sentence. The students read it silently. So this is something where we're basically making a book or a passage for the students to read. But this is connected to what they've experienced and these pictures. And so they're putting the words and the language and the writing all together with something that's very concrete in front of them. And then if you can use the story for a lot of activities. You could retell the story. You can do vocabulary. They can answer questions about the story. You can work on intonation, so where you go up and down in the sentences. You could take the sentences and put each word on cards and mix them up and have to put the words back in order. So basically, you're going to be telling the story in your sleep. But again, this is something that they're going to be connecting these words with what they've experienced and what's happened in front of them. So this is something that's a different way of learning. It's not something that's from a textbook, and it takes some practice. When I send you this, you will have all of this together, and I can also actually, there is a link to a video that you can watch this happen and see what it looks like in a classroom. So this takes more time and dedication to do, but it's a great way to do this language over and over with your learners. So this is a video, or a clip of that video that I mentioned. And again, this will be in the notes that you receive later. And I encourage you to watch this video if you're interested, because these are learners who don't have reading background. They're emergent readers, so they're just beginning. But this is really great for diverse backgrounds, different learning styles. This is reading material that's relevant to them, and it's on their level because they're the ones who generated it. But then you as the teacher can add things in if you really want to. Some other practical tips in the classroom. It is a great idea to use a needs assessment. And a needs assessment is just what do your learners need? What do they need to know? It is so important to know where your students are coming from. So, of course, the first place we want to try to start is to talk with your learner if you can. Sometimes you'll have someone who has a lot of oral language, but you may also have friends or family who can translate. You may also know things about their where they live, where they work. So as I said, there are some basic things that our learners are going to need to know. Generally, if you're in a place where they're riding the bus, they're going to need to know how to do that well, talking to their boss, talking to their landlord, things like that. Sometimes people give a needs assessment by having a very basic form. So if you have somebody who you're like, I don't know if they can read or not, if you give them like a very basic registration form and you see, can they write their name in here? You might also show them pictures of some common places in your community, like some stores that they go to, a doctor's office that a lot of your students might use or something like that. See if, does this ring a bell? So just some different ideas just to try. You may have somebody that you are not able to communicate with them and you just have to guess and go with it. And, we just pray and ask the Lord to help us to help them the best we can. But these are just some ideas to help you, because again, we want to make it relevant to our learners the best that we can. One other thing, if you've got an assistant in your classroom, especially, you can have your volunteer, that assistant, to watch the students to see, are they writing? How fast are they writing? Are they looking at the words? Are they looking somewhere else? Do they look really confused? This was a suggestion from one of those teachers with World Relief that she told me, yeah, I have my volunteers watching the students, especially if it's someone I'm concerned about, just to kind of get an idea of how are they doing? What are they thinking? So then when we're teaching oral language with our learners, we want to start with our concrete items where I talked about we're going to use our real apple before we move to our picture of an apple. We want to use listening and repetition at first, because once we start putting the written word in there, it's going to suck all the attention away. So as much as we can, we want a lot of oral activities. We can do things like dialogues, role plays, games using realia, just means real stuff, real things. Then when we can, picture cards when they're ready for pictures. We have that total physical response. Demonstrated response just means the learners listen and respond. It's kind of the same thing. Songs, chants, poems, so the things they can do in the dark. So we want to have an emphasis on this oral language. This phonemic awareness thing I talked about. Whoops, come on. So rhyming, figuring out same and different sounds, including, we talk about this if you've been in our teacher training with minimal pairs, the pair of words that only have one sound difference, like bat and vat, and figuring out which ones are different. You can do games with figuring out the initial sound, the end sound, the vowel sound, blending sounds. So if you've got basic vocabulary words and you have them work on, maybe we're doing colors. So we have red. And so we're going to say, well, what's the first sound in red? Red. And then we have R. So even just that, we're just taking just that little bit of time to isolate. You're making sure they can pronounce it, but you're also helping them separate that sound out that's going to get them ready to be reading later on. Be aware that we rely a lot on written language because that's how the English-speaking society is structured. But we have to be careful with that because we have a lot of homophones, like 8, 8, flower, flower, 4, 4. So just being aware that those are going to be tricky. And so that doesn't mean we have to run away from them. Our learners are probably very aware of words in their language that have different, the same word with different meanings. A fun story, when I lived in Bulgaria, a friend of mine was translating, it was the first summer I lived there, so I didn't speak any Bulgarian. A friend of mine, Bulgarian guy, was translating a sermon from Bulgarian into English for me and our friends. And he said in the sermon, he says, some people's heart is like a mushroom. And we're like, your heart is like a mushroom? Well, come to find out, mushroom and sponge are the same word in Bulgarian. So he meant to say their heart is a sponge and it soaks things in, but he actually said their heart is like a mushroom. So I was like, okay, well, good to know. I never forgot that was the same word after that, because we were going, what? And then somebody else goes, no, sponge. Oh, okay. So just be aware, you're gonna run into that. And when we have written language, we can distinguish those things much more easily, but when you're just hearing it, it's harder. Teaching language that is really tightly related can be confusing. For example, if you say, today we're going to teach 8 color words, that's going to get really confusing because they're only hearing these words. They're not going to see them written down at first, or they can't rely on that very well. Even if they do see them written down, it's going to be harder for them to pick up on that. So maybe we do a theme. For example, we had them the students who went to the hardware store and do the language experience. Maybe you had like a shovel and bug spray. And so these things are not super closely related, not like red, blue, yellow, green, orange. Just to help separate things out, because they're not going to be reading it, they're going to be hearing it. using concrete objects to differentiate between words. So what this means, if we are wanting our students to learn how to segment those words, to break apart sentences and know that words can be separated, we might actually need to use real things. I can't really show you because we're on Zoom. I would have some beans. Beans are a good thing, but let me see if I can. All right. So just as an idea, if I'm using a sentence like I like apples, I got 3 little stars there. And so if each of these, pretend like each of these little stars down here is a bean, because I can't really show you beans on the camera. I like apples. So then I point to the middle one. Well, what was that word? It was like. This one was I. This one was apples. So using real objects to help segment the words in the sentence, if you have learners who are having a hard time segmenting those words. You could also end up segmenting your sounds that way. So we have k, at, cat. And then maybe we move one away. We take away the first one. Now what do we have? At. So just doing those things, just listening, but using real objects to make a connection to them. We also could give picture cards. Let me move on to the next one. Picture cards with objects that are familiar. So these are all pretty basic objects. And we have something, we have a car here, we have corn here, we have a cat here, we have pencil, pen, pan. So maybe we're going to give these picture cards and we're going to sort them by the like sounds at the beginning. So car starts with k, corn starts with k, cat starts with k. So those are going to go over here. And then pencil, pen, and pan, those are going to go over here. So again, I don't have any words here, but we're working on what do these words sound like, what's similar. And this is also going to have the added benefit of making sure they're pronouncing them right. And we can also, this is from a book called, there's a book series called Explode the Code. Some of you, if you've ever taught kids or homeschool families, sometimes use it. Now, this is a children's book, but I like this because this is looking at pictures and identifying differences. So this is helping learners who maybe have never used, have never been reading and writing before. They are not necessarily used to looking at the symbols and differentiating them. Well, the letters D, like lowercase d and lowercase b, don't really look that different, right? They're just flipped. So doing something like this, and you can make something like this, it's not too hard. Doing something like this where they have to look at the pictures and figure out which one is different. Yes, this one looks pretty childish, but you could make a grown-up looking one. So we have this seal. Well, this seal is almost the same, it's just missing a whisker. This suitcase is almost the same, but the handle's over here. This dollar sign is almost the same, but it has 2 lines instead of 1. So taking some time to just really quickly doing this identifying to start training your eye to look for those things. At that point, you might also realize like, oh, I have a student that needs glasses. We had that happen in our beginning class. We had 2 students that needed to get glasses. But this is just another way that you can do that. And then you can move on to something like this, where you can easily make this. So you look at the letter in the box and then you find the letters that match it. So just working on, okay, which one looks like S? This one, this one, this one, to differentiate. Because here for P, this B could look pretty similar to that P if you're not used to differentiating what's really different. So If your student doesn't have any background with literacy, doing something like this activity is going to be helpful to them. So I do, in the resources you're going to get, I'll have a link for these books. I would say, see if you can find somebody who has one and you can just borrow some or make your own activities like this. Not everything in those books is going to be useful to you, but I liked some of these activities just for the basic that they're coming from. So after we've gotten to spend some time with oral language, when we're ready to introduce the written word, or if we're in the segment of our class that we're now doing the written word, we're going to need to make sure that we, when we're teaching reading, are connecting letters and sounds to real life words. So if you're working with children, sometimes you might have them sounding out words that are not real words. But we don't want to do that with our adult learners because, or I didn't even do that with children who were English learners, because they don't have the basis to figure out what's a real word and what's not. So we want to just make it simpler for them and just let them see that all the words we're practicing with are real words. So that way they're not confused if it's like, well, that's not actually a word. So there's a concept, if you've ever worked with kids who are learning, they'll talk about memorizing their sight words. And these are words that you just memorize to know by sight. Some of these are commonly used words that you come across a lot, like exit or bus. But we also have the word the. You can't really sound out the because there's rules for it. Said, we can't really sound out said. You just need to be able to know it. And so for students, for children, I mean, they'll get little key rings of them and they're supposed to just flip through them and be able to know them on sight. So this is something that we would want to introduce to our adult learners as well. And this is also something that if you're doing the language experience approach that I talked about, these are some common words that are going to come up in your stories. And so they're going to be seeing them and reading them, repeating them over and over. But you can use them for memory games. You could play bingo with them, board games, things like that. We can encourage learners to collect words. And what I mean by that is if they come to class and say, hey, I saw this, I keep seeing this word, like, what does that mean? Then we can help them figure out what that means. Or, I mean, now they have smartphones, they maybe take a picture, if your learners have smartphones, take a picture of something and bring it in. I saw this sign, what is this? So working on reading those things that are around them, that's really crucial because when you start recognizing the words around you, then you're practicing reading sneakily, you don't even know it. And then we'll put together a simple vocabulary into sentences. So if you've had those sight words, if you've had the words that your learners bring in, if you have your vocabulary from whatever your lesson is, pulling that together into sentences so that they're seeing how the words fit together and they can actually feel more confident because they're having this familiar language that's going together to practice reading. For you, when you are creating materials, I encourage you to use sans serif font. So serifs are those little dangly things. They're circled here on the green tee. Those things are great for people who are experienced in reading because your eye catches on them and helps you read faster. But for beginning learners, those are hard because they don't look like handwriting and they can be more confusing. So when you're on your computer, if you look up sans serif fonts, you'll find it. Also, print your text in larger sizes on the paper. You want to have it big and black and have a lot of white space. It can be very confusing and overwhelming to have a lot of things on the page. So do not feel afraid to err on the side of having lots of white space. I would say go ahead and use both uppercase and lowercase letters. That's a question that gets asked a lot. Like, should I only teach uppercase first? But the reality is in the world, they're going to see both of them. So go ahead and, yeah, this was another thing when I was looking up, researching this, like what should you do? And you hear different things. But I would say go ahead and use uppercase and lowercase letters as you're teaching. We're going to teach those concepts of print. Concept of print is like, what direction does the print go in? Well, it goes from left to right. How do you hold a book and how do you turn the pages? Some of this is just going to come through repetition. They're going to see you doing it. They're going to see you tracking from left to right on the board. They're going to see you opening a book and holding it, or helping them open the book and turn the pages the right way. And before you read something new, so if you brought in something to read, it should be short with lots of white space, big on the paper. Pictures are great too. We want to make sure that before we read something new, that we teach beforehand any vocabulary that our students need to know, any concepts. We want to connect it to what they already know. You can take, we call it a picture walk, which just means if you print, as I mentioned, there's some of these printable readers from, I think it's called like Bow Valley College, but it'll be linked in the resources you get. There are these little books and it'll have like a picture of a cabbage and like she buys cabbage. So first you could just flip through, don't even look at the words, just look at the pictures. Oh, what's that? Oh, it's a cabbage. Do you eat cabbage? Yeah, I eat cabbage. Connect to real world events again. Do you eat cabbage? That's a real world event. All right, so then we get to writing. When we're teaching writing, we have to start with the skill of writing, holding a pencil, using it to make shapes and patterns and letters. Again, this is tricky if you haven't done this before. You also have to think about, are you left-handed or right-handed? And probably your learners are going to know which hand they prefer, but then figuring out, how do you orient yourself to the paper on the table? Do you turn it this way? Do you turn it that way? You can practice making letter shapes in tactile ways. I'm going to show you in the next slide some plastic pieces that you can use to put together and make letter shapes. If you think your students, now some of your students might go, what are you doing? But it is really fun to put shaving cream on your tables and write letters in them. So if you think your students would have fun with that, you could do that. It smells great in your room. It cleans your tables too. You can also have them trace over their names. There are free online generators where you can type in a name and it'll print out a tracing sheet. You can even put them in those clear plastic sleeves and then have them trace with dry erase markers and erase them. Dry erase markers are also great if you get the fat ones, because you have a little bit more room to grip. So if you're getting used to gripping something, a fatter marker is going to be nice. So for learners who have not done any writing before, we're going to just start with making those shapes and copying shapes and practicing over and over. We're going to go from our shapes and then to words, then to sentences, longer pieces of writing. So we want to just go bit by bit. So maybe we're just practicing some letter shapes. The first word we want our students to be able to write is their name. That's always a really important one. And we want to be working on useful, relevant purposes to communicate a message. So maybe you find out one of your learners really needs to be able to write a letter to, write a note to school that says, my daughter has a doctor's appointment at 12 o'clock. So now that's not going to happen right away, but knowing that, okay, that's a goal, we need to figure out how to get there. You need to be able to write your name, and then you need to be able to copy things down. And so maybe eventually mom or dad gets to the point where they can copy down this note and fill in the time and sign it and give it to the child to take to school so that they can leave early for the doctor's appointment. All right, so here are some of the pieces that I mentioned. There's a program called Handwriting Without Tears that a lot of elementary schools use, or some homeschool families use. They have these wooden pieces. You can get the plastic ones on Amazon too. So again, this might be something, if you have a homeschool family in your church, you can borrow from them. But these could be something that you have in your classroom, and so you give all of your students some of these pieces, and then you put a letter on the board and they have to make the shape with these. It's kinesthetic learning. They're doing something, they're making something, but they're also thinking about how the letter is shaped and how to copy that shape. All right, whew, I'm gonna lose my voice. All right, so we're getting close to the end, but one other factor of working with our learners is teaching cognitive strategies. And what this means is just that if our learners don't have a background in education, there are actually other things that they might be missing. And actually, if they were educated in another country, they may not have all of these strategies either, because this is a very American-centric view. As your learners progress, just keeping in mind that this is something that you might work on or have them work on doing in class, making a prediction about a text, which might just be something like, what do you think this book is about? That's pretty much it. Sounding out words, the idea of sounding out a word is actually really abstract. And so that's something that you're going to have to teach them and work through with them. Identifying the main idea and details of something. And this is a real world strategy, because imagine if you, when you get your water bill, for example, if you actually get a paper bill anymore, you don't read the whole thing. You skim it and find the main thing, and then you write it in. You figure out how you need to pay it and you do it. So finding the main idea of something is really important to help save you time and not be so overwhelming. For later on, if your students get more advanced, if they want to get more education, they're going to need to be able to do things like finding prefixes, things that get added to the beginning of a word, suffixes that get added to the end of the word. Root word is that part in the middle. Using a dictionary, that's important. Yes, you can Google it, but you still should be able to use a dictionary, especially because alphabetical order is really important. We put a lot of things in alphabetical order, and using a dictionary is a great way to practice that. I mentioned earlier about self-monitoring, just being able to check, do I need more help with this or do I know it? And this is something that might take a little bit of time, because it's really easy to say to your students, do you understand? And everybody nods their head and they don't actually understand. And, I've been on the flip side. As I said, I lived in Bulgaria for a couple of years. And actually, before I moved there, I spent 2 summers there. And there were times where I kind of understood, but I didn't really know how to communicate that I didn't really understand. And the person that I was talking to, I was pretty sure wouldn't be able to explain it to me. And so it's much easier to be like, yeah, I think I understand, and then just try to figure out what's going on as you go. And a lot of times you can figure it out. So it's not that somebody's trying to be deceitful to you if they say, yeah, I understand. Sometimes they really think they do understand. So there are all kinds of reasons why you might get a different answer. So that's just something that we want to keep encouraging our students to check in with them, check in on themselves. Do you get it? Do you need more help with it? And then also organizing materials. This is something else that students learn in school, how to organize their handouts, how to put things in order, how to study at home or do homework at home. So this is more of if you've got somebody who has moved up to a higher level in terms of reading and writing, but because they didn't have much educational background, these are some skills that you might need to check in on them later on and make sure that they've gotten these. All right, so this has been a whole lot of information, right? So a few things that I just want you to be able to think about and take away from this right now. One is just that we talked about so many different possibilities for students' backgrounds. So I want you to just be aware of the fact that the students can have so many different backgrounds in terms of, does their culture use written language or does it not? Maybe they have those concepts of literacy, maybe they don't. I also want you to think about the complexity of literacy and maybe get just a little bit overwhelmed by it, just so that you recognize that this is a lot more complicated than just being able to know A, B, C, D. But there's more going on there, because it helps us to take some time and step back and work with our students on these other foundational things. I want you to take away the importance of instruction with oral language, and know that it is perfectly fine with beginners to spend a whole lot of time without using written words, to teach things orally. It's not usually what we're the most comfortable with doing, but it will do a lot for them in terms of giving them the tools that they need right now and helping to prepare them to build on it to learn how to read and write. I want to make sure that you take away making sure your language is connected to real words and concepts, especially for these learners. They need to know, connecting to concrete things as much as possible. We don't want things to be so abstract. And finally, I hope that you've gotten some tools to help you working with your learners to move just step by step towards literacy. It can be a long road. There's a lot to think about, but it is possible and they can get there. Even learners who have never had any reading background, they can get there as adults. They probably won't get up to, reading big, thick novels anytime soon, but we can help them get some of those functional skills to become literate. So just a couple of ideas, and again, you're going to get this, so don't feel like you have to write all this down. Just a few curriculum things I wanted to point out. This Literacy Plus book is actually out of print. Unfortunately, I did get a copy on Amazon, but I like it because it does some of those things like I showed you with the like find which letter isn't this, or which letter matches the other letter. It does some of those foundational things with looking at, do these shapes match each other? The ESL literacy book from Pearson Longman is another one that's really a text for these very beginning learners. If you're using a curriculum, the Intercambio intro level book is pretty good. It is going to assume some ability for literacy, so you'll have to add in some things. And then those pictures that I showed you, the ones I said were from the kids book, are from the Explode the Code series, which is what this is. So again, it is a children's program, but you can borrow a few things from it.